This is the old State Bank in Decatur, a beautiful place to talk about family inheritance. Speaking of inheritance, a funeral director once told me I'd be shocked at the frequent arguments and near fistfights that break out in his office after a death over who's getting what of what's left behind. Divvying up the inheritance can divvy up families. In Jesus' day, it seems to have been the same. Today we begin a summer series about the teaching stories, the parables of Jesus. And in a few minutes, we're going to hear an interesting story Jesus told about two brothers and their struggle over their inheritance. But before we move on, let me state something painfully obvious that comes out of the parable we are considering today. You and I are not going to live forever. We don't like to think about death, I know. We jog and eat bran muffins, and we buy wrinkle remover creams. We try to dye the gray out of our hair. I know. I tried once. It's a long, embarrassing story. My point is, though, that although death is not a fun topic, we need to live now like we're not going to live forever. Let me say that again. We need to live now like we're not going to live forever. A pastor from Hawaii named Wayne Cordero made a great point. He took out his pen and he drew a long vertical line on a big piece of paper. He called that line a scratch. And he explained that the width of that scratch, about a 1/32 of an inch, represents how long our life on earth is compared to eternity, forever. It's not very long. And yet, Pastor Cordero said, some folks act like that little scratch, our comparatively brief existence on earth, is all there is. He said people save for that scratch and hoard for that scratch. They live scratch lives with scratch hopes and scratch dreams. That's the point of the parable we're going to look at today. The danger of living only for that scratch. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about the man in Jesus' parable who declared, I'm going to build bigger barns and I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. He intended to make the most of that scratch, but forgot that scratch, our relatively brief time on earth, is not all there is.
I come with no defense, can't prove my innocence. My only hope remains grace upon grace. Can't pay for what I've done. My sin I can't outrun. But your mercy made a way with grace upon grace. So like an ocean wave crashing over me, come and drown my shame in your mercy's deep. Oh, rid my soul of every guilty stain with grace upon grace. Oh, what a selfless trade. Your blood for my mistakes, my treason in exchange for grace upon grace. So like an ocean wave crashing over me, come and drown my shame in your mercy's deep. Oh, rid my soul of every guilty stain with grace upon grace. I surrender all, with hands held high I fall. I surrender all. Lord, my heart is yours, take it and make it pure. Lord, my heart is yours. I surrender all, with hands held high I fall. I surrender all. Lord, my heart is yours, take it and make it pure. Lord, my heart is yours. Like an ocean wave crashing over me, come and drown my shame in your mercy's deep. Oh, rid my soul of every guilty stain with grace upon grace. So like an ocean waves crashing over me, come and drown my shame in your mercy's deep. Oh, rid my soul of every guilty stain with grace upon grace, upon grace, upon grace.
Peggy Towns joins us here at the Old State Bank in Decatur. It's great to reconnect with you again.
Absolutely.
And you're a historian here in Decatur.
I am.
And have written 3 books. Tell us about those 3 books.
Okay, my first book actually was a fluke. While I was doing my genealogy, I found that we had a Civil War soldier out on a branch. And he was with the USCT, served with the 110th. Well, I had never heard of USCTs in North Alabama. So I did some research and found out just some amazing history. Did you know that Decatur, Alabama is the first of only 2 towns that actually raised a USCT regiment?
No, did not know
Yes,
that.
so not many people did. So I wrote my first book about that. And my second book is about the Scottsboro Boys trial. And it is actually the first of its genre that talks about locals here in Decatur.
Because we know the Scottsboro story, but not that the trial was in Decatur.
That's true, but only one trial, the first trial, was held in Scottsboro. All the rest of the trials were held here in Decatur from 1933 to 1937.
And then the other book that you wrote is Scapegoat, the Tommy Lee Hines story.
Right, and you may remember that Tommy Lee Hines was an intellectually disabled young man who was accused of assaulting 3 white women, and he spent time, they asked for a change of venue. The trial was transferred to Coleman that had 1% black, so he actually received a 30-year prison term.
And Peggy, part of your legacy will be telling these stories that people didn't realize they were making history when these events occurred in their life. What have you learned from the people you've written about?
Well, my job is to actually be a voice for these people. So I've learned about their perseverance, their courage, their tenacity. What it has taken for them to survive. For instance, in Decatur, during the Scottsboro Boys trial, the black community came together in force to be a voice for those young men. At that time, Alabama had a law that there were no blacks in jury pools. And so they came together, many of them, and testified in court that yes, we are capable of serving as jurors, we're qualified, and we know others as well.
And you have a grandson, granddaughter.
I do.
What do you want them to tell their grandchildren about Peggy Towns?
I hope that through what God has given me, that people, not just my family, but that people are blessed, that they have joy, that they receive encouragement, that they're inspired, that they show love. And that's what I pray that my legacy is, that I leave this world a better place.
And we can all hope
Yes,
for that.
yes,
Thanks, Peggy.
absolutely.
Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And then he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God."
So today, we consider the parable of the man with full barns who was living only for that scratch, his relatively brief time on earth. Remember the scratch? Wayne Cordero drew a scratch, a line about 1/32 of an inch wide, representing how long our life on earth is compared to eternity. And it's not very long. The man in today's parable forgot that. Jesus warned the two brothers about greed and even said that the man who wanted to build bigger barns was a fool. But the man was not a fool because his barns were bulging. A late friend of mine named Paul had a magnificent corner of the world with his name on it down at the Hardin County, Kentucky courthouse. He could sit at his dining room table and look out through a big picture window over a beautiful, bountiful farm. And there came a time when he actually said to me, "I really need another barn, but I can't bring myself to build one." He said, I just can't forget that story Jesus told about the foolish man who planned to build extra barns and died that very night. Of course, my friend Paul had missed the point about the barns. Building more barns is not a sin. There's no sin in making a good living. Ecclesiastes 5:19 says, "When God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift of God." To work hard at and enjoy and earn a good salary in your vocation is a good thing, and so is planning for the future. Saving your money in a bank is a good thing. In fact, this bank vault is kind of like the equivalent of the barn in Jesus' story. Proverbs 21:20 reads, "In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has." The man in Jesus' story was not called a fool because he had made a good living and planned for the future. So, what are we to learn from this story? Number one, we're not going to be here forever. I already talked about that. Number two, we'd probably be disappointed if we could know what's going to happen to our stuff when we're gone. Jesus asked the man with the bulging barns a haunting question. Who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Who's going to get all your stuff? Sometimes I come across some of my things in the attic, like childhood trophies and things I've kept for sentimental value. And I say to myself, my kids are going to be so happy I left these things behind for them. And then, almost immediately, a second thought comes to mind. Travis, who are you kidding? I hear a voice that says, they're going to throw away all those things, and it's good you won't be around to hear them ask, why in the world you kept so much stuff? We all would probably be disappointed if we could look back beyond death to see what happened to stuff we thought was so important. Jesus asked the man with the bursting barns, he asked him a haunting question. Who is going to get all your stuff? Remember, the problem with the man in Jesus' story was not that he had full barns. The problem was that he was living as if full barns were the be-all, end-all. He was living as if his stuff had ultimate importance and was the ultimate goal. So Jesus asked him a haunting question. Who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Who's going to get all your stuff? The stuff in our barns or attics or bank accounts and the titles and recognition we all worked so hard for. All that is not going to be as important as we might act like it is. Again, the stuff in our barns, our attic, or bank accounts, and the titles and recognitions we've worked so hard for. All that is not as important as we might act like it is. The man in Jesus' story was no more a fool to have full barns than someone is a fool to have a strong bank account. He simply forgot that this life is like a little bitty scratch on a huge piece of paper. Now, I don't want to be that old guy who's always trying to impart the wisdom of age to his young and inexperienced listeners. But there is a perspective that comes from having had 62 birthdays that at least I have not had always. I'm increasingly aware, for example, of my mortality. Not obsessed with it, just aware of it. And I live with a greater sense of urgency than I did before. And I think about what's important more than I did before. And I think about what those folks sitting on the first 2 or 3 rows of my funeral will think of me more than I did before. Those who have paid me over the years have been generous. But I'm not going to leave great sums of money to my family. I can, however, leave them with the assurance of my love and with my blessing. And for whatever it's worth, I want to leave them with a sense of where I stood when it counted. I live with the belief that a good legacy is more important than barns. So I've collected for my grandchildren copies of things I've written, including things I've written about hot topics. It's important to me that they know where their Papa C stood on important issues and that they know he cared enough to speak his convictions. What they think of me years after I'm in heaven has become really important to me. The legacy I leave, the legacy of conviction and love and blessing, is far more important than the stuff I will leave. Furthermore, as I get older, I live with the realization that I will not only leave a legacy of some sort here, I will face my Creator there. You see, it's not only about the legacy we leave here, it's about who we will meet beyond our scratch. Back to the rich man with the barns. His foolishness was in his short-sightedness. He didn't plan for eternity. Tonight, Jesus said, your soul will be required of you. Our time on earth is but a scratch. There's an old legend about a king who in his court had a court jester. The court jester's job was to keep the king entertained. The king found him so amusing that one day he handed the court jester his royal scepter and said, I want to give you my scepter because I love how foolish you are. And if you ever find a bigger fool than yourself, give it to him. Many years later, the king lay dying, and his court jester was summoned to his side. When the jester arrived, carrying the king's scepter, the king said, "I'm going on a long journey from which I never shall return, and I wanted to say farewell to you." "So you're going on a long journey," said the jester. "I imagine you have asked about the place you're going and that you have made the necessary preparations." "Actually, no," said the king. I haven't even given much thought to life beyond the grave." After a long, thoughtful pause, the court jester reached out and handed the dying king the scepter which the king had given to the jester years earlier. "Sir," the jester said, "you once told me that if I ever found a fool bigger than myself, I should give him this scepter. And as I see it, anyone going on a journey from which he never shall return without making preparation is a bigger fool than I. One day, every one of us will breathe a breath that will be our last on earth, and immediately we will embark upon a journey from which we never will return. Not to make preparation for that is foolish indeed. An obsession with positions and possessions on earth, this little scratch, seems rather trivial given that our time on earth is so, well, comparatively brief. All of us will stand before God. That is a breathtaking truth. But we can make preparation for that by trusting our lives in this world and the next to Jesus. And then by living with the realization that life on earth is just a scratch.
I hear the Savior say, "Thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. 'Cause Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. Lord, now indeed I find thy power and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. 'Cause Jesus paid him all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised his life up from the dead. You brought me back to life, Jesus. And when before the throne I stand in him complete, Jesus died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat,
Thanks for joining us for TV Church today. I'm Kristen, minister to kids and families here at First Baptist Huntsville.
And I'm John, the minister to young adults, which would be those in their 20s and 30s. Now, you've joined us from all across the Tennessee Valley, and we want you, wherever you are, to feel like a part of First Baptist Church, the church at the heart of the city with a heart for the region. Now, we say this every week, but we really want you to do it. So to find ways that you can do so, check out our Facebook page and our website, fbchsv.org.
We also want to invite you to take a look at tvchurch.info. There you'll find a number of helpful resources like ways to connect or previous episodes. You'll also find a great resource there that Travis has written with you in mind. If you're curious about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, or even if you just want a refresher, then we invite you to go to that page and download his booklet, Stuff I Wish I Had Learned in Sunday School.
We heard today's message on living not for this life, but for the next life. So please join us now in this closing prayer that's adapted from our passage today in Luke chapter 12. God, help us be on our guard against coveting, remembering that our lives do not consist of the abundance of our possessions.
Remind us not to lay up treasures for ourselves on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Help us to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Remind us that where our treasure is, our hearts will be also. Amen.